You'd think after 20 years, you'd get more than a 15-minute meeting. My name's Elliot Frost. I'm 55 years old, and I live in Port Arbor, Oregon. Until this morning, I was the head brewer at Hearthstone Brewery. Miles Kramer, the new CEO, sat behind my old boss's desk like he owned the place. Which, technically, he did now. Polished smile, expensive watch, and a brand new MBA he probably still had the price tag on. I sat stiff in the chair across from him, my hands resting on my knees, trying not to grip the fabric too hard. Elliot, we appreciate everything you've done, Miles started, in that voice people use when they're firing you and pretending it's not personal. But as part of our modernization strategy, we're moving in a different direction. Next to him, Asha, some consultant flown in from who knows where, barely glanced up from her tablet. She tapped a few times, and I caught a glimpse of my own name on a spreadsheet before she scrolled past it like yesterday's garbage. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I wasn't stupid. I knew this wasn't about modernization. It was about image. About erasing the guy who wore flannel shirts and smelled like hops, not designer cologne. Miles shifted in his seat, looking almost embarrassed by my silence. We've already identified a successor who's more aligned with our future goals, he added, like it was some mercy. Of course they had. Probably some flashy kid with slick-back hair and zero brewing experience. I thought about the fermentation room, about the yeast strains I'd kept alive for 2 decades, about the gold medals we won at nationals, and felt a knot tighten in my chest. Slowly, I pulled my leather-bound brewing journals from the bag at my feet. The spine was cracked from years of flipping through it, scribbling notes, tracking every experiment, every perfect batch, every lesson that textbooks couldn't teach. I placed it gently on the desk between us. Miles hesitated before reaching for it, like it was a live grenade. Good luck, I said quietly. My voice sounded steady, even though everything inside me was tilting sideways. Asha didn't even look up. I stood, buttoned my coat, a useless little reflex, and turned toward the door. My boots thudded heavily against the polished concrete floor. No one followed. No one called after me. When I stepped outside, the winter air hit my face like a slap. Hearthstone's sign swayed slightly in the breeze. Award-winning craftsmanship since 1982, it boasted in elegant copper letters. Craftsmanship. Right. I shoved my hands deep into my pockets and walked toward the parking lot, feeling like a ghost of myself. 2 decades, wiped clean in a 15-minute meeting. And the worst part was, they weren't even going to miss me. I drove home the long way, past all the places that felt like open wounds now. First was McConnell's Pub, with its bright neon banner still hanging in the window, proudly serving award-winning Hearthstone ale. The same ale I spent years perfecting. They didn't know, or maybe they didn't care, that the man who made it was gone. Every red light felt like a punch. Every familiar building another reminder that I'd given my best years to a place that threw me out like bad yeast. When I pulled into my driveway, the house sat still and gray under the heavy Oregon sky. I turned off the engine but didn't get out. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching the clouds roll in. My wedding ring tapped softly against the plastic steering wheel as I twisted it back and forth. Rosalind used to tease me about that nervous habit. Rosalind. The ache hit hard. I leaned back and closed my eyes. She used to say, "You're bottling happiness for people, Elle." That was how she explained all the late nights and missed birthdays to our son, Nathan. That was how she explained it to herself, too, when I missed our 20th anniversary because a fermentation tank had a leak and no one else knew how to fix it. I thought about Nathan's first art show in middle school. How he stood up there with his crooked little paintings, scanning the crowd for his dad. How later, Rosalind said, "He gets it, Elle. He knows you're doing important work." I told myself that too, over and over. The first few years at Hearthstone had felt like a fresh start. After the 2008 crash wiped out my old job at the boutique brewery, and after Rosalind's hospital bills piled up higher than our roof, Hearthstone was a godsend. They weren't flashy. They weren't chasing trends. They just wanted good beer and loyal hands. Or at least, they used to. I finally climbed out of the truck, the cold biting through my jacket. I walked up the driveway slowly, like if I took long enough, maybe the world would somehow rewind and fix itself. The house was silent inside. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the old clock ticking in the hall. I wandered into the living room, the walls still lined with Nathan's old paintings, crooked frames and all. A couple of awards from brewing competitions hung there too, dusty and a little off-kilter, but still there. Proof that I'd built something. That I'd mattered. I dropped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't about skill. I knew that now. They didn't fire me because I made a bad batch or missed a deadline. Hell, the last 5 seasonal releases had broken sales records. No, they fired me because they wanted a shinier story to tell investors. New blood. New energy. Modernization, they called it. What they really meant was, you remind people of the past. And we don't want the past anymore. I rubbed my hands over my face, feeling every year of hard work settle into my bones. 20 years, and none of it mattered now. I wasn't part of their future. I wasn't part of anything. The first message came in before the sun even finished rising. Hey, Elliot, can you call me? Something's not right with the winter ale batch. Then another. Fermentation schedule's off. Need clarification. When did you usually start the cold crash? By 9 a.m., my phone looked like a switchboard. 15 missed calls. 9 text messages. 2 voicemails from people who barely said hello to me at the holiday parties. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling a lukewarm cup of coffee, just staring at the screen. They were panicking. I scrolled through the messages without replying. One from Jared, the assistant brewer, practically begging for help. We can't get the carbonation right on batch 211. It's tasting flat. What did you adjust last year? I sipped the coffee. Bitter. Too strong. Probably because I forgot to add sugar. Or maybe because I didn't really taste anything anymore. The thing about brewing, real brewing, is that it's not just science. It's feel. It's experience. Knowing when a mash smells a little off even if the thermometer says it's fine. Catching the way the yeast behaves differently when the humidity spikes after a rainstorm. No manual, no spreadsheet could teach you that. They thought they could replace 2 decades of gut instinct with a checklist on a tablet. Good luck with that. The worst part was, I wanted to help. God help me, I wanted to. These were my beers they were butchering. My processes. My reputation still hanging in every bottle that bore the Hearthstone label. But there was that thick stack of papers sitting on the counter. The ones I signed when they handed me my severance package. The ones Asha slid across the table with barely a glance. Non-disclosure. Non-disparagement. No consulting unless expressly contracted. In plain English, I was legally gagged. Even if I wanted to save them, even if I wanted to grab the phone, tell Jared exactly how long to dry hop the pale ale before it turned grassy, I couldn't. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I didn't. I set the phone down, face down on the table, and leaned back in my chair. It hit me then, harder than it had at any point yesterday. I wasn't just some guy who followed a recipe. I was the recipe. I was the whisper between the boil and the cool down. I was the reason Hearthstone had a wall full of blue ribbons and glowing Yelp reviews. They hadn't replaced me. They had thrown out the one thing they couldn't replicate. And now, they were flailing in the dark, sending frantic texts to a man they had already decided wasn't good enough for their future. I smiled. A small, bitter smile. They could drown in it for all I cared. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. The first headline popped up 3 days later on the local news site. Beloved Hearthstone Brewery faces quality control issues, pulls seasonal release. I clicked the link without even thinking. There it was, my old brewery, my life's work, plastered under a sloppy picture of a beer tap leaking foam all over the bar. The article was brutal. Complaints about off flavors, flat pours, deliveries canceled without warning. The winter ale, the one I perfected over 6 long winters, was described as metallic and undrinkable. A comment section war had already started. What happened to Hearthstone? Bring back whoever used to run the brewing. I'm switching to Silverwood. At least their beers still taste like beer. I sat back in my recliner, the remote dangling uselessly from my hand. I wasn't even sure what I felt. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It wasn't anger either. Just hollow. I flipped through more articles. Distributors were pulling contracts. Pubs were canceling kegs mid-season, opting for smaller, more reliable brewers. Even the grocery stores were slashing prices on 6-packs just to clear shelf space. The dominoes were falling, one by one. Later that night, my phone buzzed on the end table. I let it ring twice before picking it up. It was Vera McAllister, Hearthstone's head of sales, one of the few people there I actually respected. Elliot, she said, her voice low and careful. Hey, I know you're probably busy, but I was wondering if we could talk. Maybe. Grab coffee. I leaned my head back and stared at the ceiling. How bad is it? I asked. Vera gave a soft, humorless laugh. You ever seen a train wreck where the engineers are still arguing over who gets to blow the whistle? That painted the picture pretty clearly. They're panicking, she continued. Miles thought he could run the brewing ops like a spreadsheet. But now the distributors are threatening lawsuits. Customers are returning full cases. We even had a bar complain about contaminated casks. I said nothing. Let her sit in the silence with me. Finally, she added, almost in a whisper, they're desperate, Elliot. It's bad. I closed my eyes for a long moment. Part of me wanted to swoop in and fix it. Show up, sleeves rolled up, and right every wrong like some storybook craftsman saving the day. But another part, the louder part, knew better. They wanted modern. They wanted efficient. They wanted clean slates. Well, now they had one. Thanks for letting me know, I said, my voice steady. Listen, Vera hesitated. Off the record? I think they're trying to figure out a way to call you. Make it sound like some special consultant gig. I smiled faintly, even though it hurt. Let M squirm a little longer, I said. It's good for M. She chuckled. Yeah, maybe it is. We said our goodbyes, and I set the phone back down. Outside, the sky had darkened to a heavy charcoal. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows down the empty street. I watched them blink into life, one by one. Same as the mistakes piling up at Hearthstone. And I didn't feel guilty at all. They waited until Friday to call. Probably figured it looked more professional, end the week on a high note. Pitch it like a fresh start. I was stirring a pot of chili when the phone rang. When I saw the number, I almost laughed. Unknown caller. Cowards. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered anyway, just to hear it for myself. Elliot. Hi. Miles Kramer here. His voice was way too cheerful, like we were old buddies catching up after a round of golf. Right, I said, keeping my tone flat. Miles. There was a tight pause. I could almost hear him recalibrating his pitch. We've been doing some strategic reviews over here, and we realized there's a huge opportunity for synergy. Cut to the chase, I interrupted. You need help. Another pause. Shorter this time. Yes, he said finally. We're facing a few transitional challenges. We were hoping you might be open to coming back on a consulting basis. Emergency contract. Triple your old salary, of course. I let that hang in the air for a second, just long enough for him to start sweating on the other end. Triple pay? Huh? I said slowly. That's generous. Miles chuckled nervously. Well, we value your legacy knowledge. We'd love to integrate your expertise into our modernization process. Legacy knowledge. God, the MBA speak never stopped with him. Before I could answer, Asha's voice chimed in faintly in the background. She must have been on speakerphone. We can start you Monday if you're available. No formal rehire needed. Just a short-term contractor. Clean. Efficient. I smiled, though there was nothing friendly about it. That's very thoughtful, I said. But I'll have to decline. There was a scrambling sound. Miles trying to mute Asha. Maybe, but I kept talking, steady as a drumbeat. I've already accepted another offer. Silverwood Brewing. Full-time. Chief Brewing Officer. Silence. Long enough that I thought they might have hung up. Finally, Miles stammered. Wait, Silverwood? They're direct competition. They are, I agreed. Good people. Respect the craft. Still believe beer's more than a line item on a quarterly report. Another few beats of stunned silence. And since my severance didn't include a non-compete clause, I added casually, there's nothing stopping me. I heard Asha has something probably reminding him that she'd signed off on the severance paperwork herself. Miles tried to recover, but he sounded like a man standing in quicksand. We could offer a retention bonus? A creative partnership arrangement? I almost felt bad for him. Almost. No thanks, I said calmly. I prefer brewing for people who still remember what good beer tastes like. And I hung up. Just like that. I stood there in my kitchen, the smell of simmering chili filling the room, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt light. Not just free. Triumphant. Let them choke on their own ambition. I had a new future now. One built on respect, not buzzwords. And I wasn't about to trade it for anything. It was about a week after I officially signed on with Silverwood when Vera called again. We met at a little diner just outside of town, the kind of place with cracked leather booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked right since the 90s. I slid into the booth across from her. She looked tired. Not the usual work tired, either. The kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. She didn't waste time. They set you up, Elliot, Vera said, stirring her coffee like it might give her the courage to finish the sentence. I didn't say anything. Just waited. She leaned in, voice low. Miles wasn't trying to modernize the brewery. That was a cover. The real plan was to gut the operation, automate the brewing, and flip the company to Drake Tech. My stomach twisted. Drake Tech. Biggest tech conglomerate on the West Coast. They've been sniffing around the craft beer scene for a few years now, looking to turn artisan brewing into something they could run with half a dozen buttons and a handful of AI recipes. They call it smart brewing, Vera said, disgust dripping off the words. Algorithm-driven flavor profiling. Automated fermentation management. No human input unless absolutely necessary. She pushed a folder across the table, thick with printed emails, memos, internal presentations. I flipped it open. There it was. Page after page, timeline after timeline. My termination had been scheduled months before Miles ever officially took over. The so-called modernization campaign was just phase one of the buyout. Clean house. Erase the legacy brewers. Make the place lean enough for a corporate acquisition. And me? I wasn't a loose end. I was an obstacle. I sat back, the cheap vinyl seat creaking under me. I should have been furious. Should have slammed my fist down and cursed every name in that folder. But mostly, I just felt tired. Like I'd been holding up a crumbling wall for 20 years, not realizing the people behind it were already busy tearing it down brick by brick. They wanted you gone before they closed the deal, Vera said, pushing her coffee aside. Wanted to make sure there wasn't anyone left who could fight back. Anyone with real loyalty to the old Hearthstone. I nodded slowly, staring out the window at the cracked asphalt parking lot. They didn't just fire me, I said quietly. They erased me. Vera reached across the table and tapped the folder. You're not erased, Elliot. Not if you tell the right people. I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just passing along gossip. She was giving me a weapon. A loaded one. Maybe they thought they could erase the past. But they forgot one thing. You can't delete people who built the damn foundation with their bare hands. Not without consequences. Silverwood Brewing didn't just hire me to make beer. They gave me a platform. 2 months into the new job, they sponsored me as a keynote speaker at the Pacific Northwest Brewers Conference, the biggest event of the year for anyone in the industry who cared about craft over commerce. When they asked me what I wanted to talk about, I didn't even have to think. Tradition versus tech, the hidden cost of smart brewing. The auditorium was packed. Brewers, distributors, journalists, even a few curious investors. Hearthstone's booth sat near the back, tucked in a corner like they were hoping no one would notice them. I spotted Miles right away, stiff in his 2 new blazer, pretending to scroll through his phone. I stepped up to the podium, took a slow breath, and let it rip. I started with a soft approach, talking about brewing as an art, a craft passed down through experience and instinct. I spoke about the subtle dance of temperature, yeast, and time that no machine could truly replicate. And then I shifted. I pulled out Vera's folder, projected the slides onto the giant screen behind me. Hearthstone's internal memos about firing legacy talent. Emails between Miles and Drake tech execs, talking about full automation rollout by Q3. Profit projections showing how much they'd save by cutting human brewers altogether. The room went dead silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize it. I just told the truth. By the time I finished, half the room was buzzing with whispers. People snapping photos of the slides. Journalists typing furiously into their laptops. I stepped back from the podium, letting the document speak louder than I ever could. Miles stood up in the back, face bright red, waving his arms at someone, probably trying to get the AV team to kill the feed. Too late. The damage was done. Afterward, people swarmed me. Other brewers shook my hand, thanking me for saying what everyone else was too afraid to say. Distributors who had been quietly pulling away from Hearthstone came forward, promising their loyalty to Silverwood. Even the regulatory bodies were there, asking for copies of my documents. By the next morning, 3 separate industry watchdogs had launched investigations into Hearthstone's acquisition practices. News sites picked it up too. Craft brewery betrayal, how Hearthstone sold out tradition for profit. Vera called me that night, her voice hoarse from laughing. You broke the internet, she said, and maybe saved the industry. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the dark ceiling. For years, I'd worked in the shadows, happy just to make good beer and keep my head down. But not anymore. Not this time. They erased me from their story. So I wrote a new one. And this time, everybody heard it.